winds are blowing through. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Crosby Kemper, the director of the library, and we're very glad that you're here tonight for the fourth in our series, Dateline Washington, with David von Drehle and tonight David Finkel. I'll mention a couple of upcoming programs and then introduce the Davids tonight. We have, as you know, an ongoing series of events related to our NEA-sponsored fifth version of our NEA-sponsored Big Read, where we're all reading the same book. I can tell you are all reading True Grit with us, and we have some. We have a great exhibit of the photographs of F.M. Steele about what True Grit might have looked like downstairs. And on October 20th, Jim Hoy, who's one of the great figures, academic figures in the history of the American West, and himself a rancher, will be talking about that here at the Central Library. I want to mention that. We have an ongoing series on the great religions, and as part of a program with the Nelson Atkins and the Kansas City Artists Coalition, we'll be doing Muslim journeys, understanding Islam and Muslims beyond the headlines, and which dovetails a little bit into tonight's program with the head of the Harvard Near Eastern Languages and Culture Department, Ali Asani, and that's October 29th at the Plaza. And then last but not least, in our October programming anyway, I want to mention that we have next Wednesday, we have Jill Lepore. Jill Lepore is the David Woods Kemper, that's my cousins, the other side of the family, professor of history at Harvard. This is the second time she's been at the library. She's written some really wonderful books. She's one of our best historians, and she writes great essays, historical essays for the New Yorker. She'll be here talking about her new book, which I'm just in the middle of, and is a fabulous book called Book of Ages. It's about the life of Jane Franklin, who is Benjamin Franklin's sister. And there's some letters of hers to Benjamin Franklin and not much else from her or about her historically, and yet this is a 350-page book, and it's a feat. It is a historical feat. It is a feat of writing and research, what Jill Lepore does with this book, and it's brilliantly written. So I'd urge you to come and hear her here at the Central Library on Wednesday, October 23rd. So that's what's coming up. But tonight you have a special treat. It was a special treat. The Davids are here, and I want to first introduce David von Drehle, whose series this is. Those of you who've been in our previous programs have heard my introductions before, but I get into a little bit more detail each time. So I do want to tell you about his early career tonight. David, as you probably know from previous introductions, was the youngest sports writer in the history of Denver. He was so young, he was a minor, that they wouldn't let him cover everything. So instead of covering the Denver Broncos, he had to cover the Denver Colts. Thank you, that's a joke, yeah. Thank you, you got that joke, which actually turns out to be true now that Peyton Manning is there. They wouldn't let him cover the Denver Nuggets, just the Denver Nugget. Or McNuggets, as the case may be. But as you know, he went on to a sterling journalistic career, going to the Miami Herald, where he taught Don Johnson how to dress, as you can tell, and then to Washington D.C. and New York, working for the Washington Post, all the way up to assistant managing editor, winning lots of journalistic awards along the way. He's also become a great writer of history. His book on the Triangle Fire is one of the best books, or maybe the best book ever written about a disaster in the United States, the greatest commercial building disaster in American history. And then he's been here in the library talking about his great book about Abraham Lincoln, Rise to Greatness, about the year 1862 and the lead up to the Emancipation Proclamation. So David is one of the great American journalists. He's now a great American historian, and we're honored to have him do this series. We're grateful to the Truman Library Institute, to be a co-sponsor of this program with us, and the Ewan Kauffman Foundation for continuing it, for funding it. We're grateful tonight for David for bringing the other David to us. I hope that some of you know David Finkel's work. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist for his work in explaining Yemen. And winning the Pulitzer Prize is nothing. Explaining Yemen, deserves probably a Nobel Prize. He's won also a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award, which I guess is, again, explaining Yemen would got to be a genius. He is lately a reporter for the Post. He leads a team of reporters who are covering the current height of terrorism in the world, the shutdown of the government in Washington. Actually, I think they're voting as we speak, and I think they're actually going to reopen it. And there are those of you who on one side of the political fence who think the shutdown is an act of terrorism. There are those on my side who think reopening it is the act of terrorism. But anyway, David conducts this team of reporters at the Post. In the meantime, he was embedded in Iraq with the 216, which you can read about in his brilliant book, a New York Times 10 Best Books book, The Good Soldiers. It's one of the best, if not the best book I've ever read about a soldier's eye view of war. And he's followed it up with a book, and both these books have a local connection. Thank You for Your Service is his recent book, also a brilliant book. A lot of it takes place in or people coming from Fort Riley. He was, in essence, embedded at Fort Riley as well. And these are very, very moving stories. In the first book, primarily on the ground in Iraq, and I mean really on the ground with things flying past. And then really on the ground back home with families and the results of the war. Two really brilliant books. So in any case, we are honored to have David von Drehle once again do Dateline Washington, and we're very honored that he brought David Finkel tonight. Thank you.
After you.
Have a seat.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much for coming out this month. Thank you to the Truman Library Foundation, or Institute, and the Kaufman Foundation for their support, and of course to Crosby and Henry and the Chepto, the people at the great Kansas City Public Library for making this possible. This is a very special evening for me to get to talk with one of my journalistic heroes, David Finkel. For those of us who write, David is one of the handful of people who are really above and beyond. He's an extraordinary writer, but that work is based first and foremost in his unbelievable powers of concentration and empathy as a reporter. And I hope you'll get a chance to see some of that and come to understand what a remarkable figure he is. About 6 or 7 years ago, I think, we were sitting together having lunch. He won't remember this, but I certainly do. It's indelible in my mind, at a coffee shop in Washington, D.C., and David was talking about that he might have an idea for a book. And those of us who know him know that he doesn't bubble over with overt self-confidence. And so he was anguishing over whether he would be able to actually write a whole book, which is never any question to anyone else except him. What he came up with, though, after embedding with a United States Army infantry unit in Afghanistan was extraordinary. And I'll just give you the line from Daniel Okrent's review in Fortune magazine. And Dan, I will just say in an aside, sometimes edits my copy for Time magazine, and I will tell you that he's not really fast and loose with praise, shall we put it that way? not a pushover. Let me be direct. The Good Soldiers by David Finkel is the most honest, most painful, and most brilliantly rendered account of modern war I have ever read. David, tell us a little bit about how you did The Good Soldiers.
Well, first of all, I do remember the conversation. And this was a period after I had agreed in principle with a publisher to do the book, but I was still searching for disability insurance before I went to Iraq. And I think what I was asking you is if you knew any good insurance agents. So the first book, this is a little weird because I talk about these books a lot, but I've not really talked about them much in Kansas, where the people I write about come from. And it's just going to be strange tonight and then tomorrow night when I go to Manhattan to talk at Kansas State, and some folks from Fort Riley and Junction City, people I've written about, come over. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, The Good Soldiers, it's the reason. Let me shorthand this. The Good Soldiers is a book about the Iraq War, but it's really a book about what happened when a battalion of 800 or so 19 and 20-year-olds were sent into the surge and what was presumed by many to be the war at its lost moment, the war at its tragic moment. And into that war went 800 guys from Fort Riley who, almost to a man, were filled with a sense of mission, a lot of patriotism, an amazing sense of invincibility, that they were going to be the ones to go in and win the war. And that's the way they went. They went to a tough area of Baghdad, and what happened is what happens in war. They were well trained, and then they lost their first guy, and then they lost their second guy, and then they, the wounds started mounting. Lost arms, lost legs, bomb after bomb, kind of darkening souls to a degree. And when they came home after 15 months, of course they were changed, and that's what war does. In many cases, they had been degraded by what they had done or seen, what they had been witness to or part of. And so that's the first book. They were there on the ground for 14 months. I was with them. The type of journalism I do, as David knows, is a type of journalism that doesn't depend so much on interviews or archival research as much as being present. So they were there for 14 months. I was on the ground with them for about 8 of the 14 months, just documenting what happens to a young man at that moment of such a war. And that's it. They had a tough time, and it's kind of honestly and unflinchingly all in the first book. And I'm giving a long answer, but basically what happened is when I came home, I thought I was done with it. But after the book came out, some guys began calling me and saying that, they weren't quite sure what was going on, but they were feeling anxious, they were feeling depressed. Some stories came in about a few guys who tried to kill themselves. And at some point it dawned on me that what I had done, however well it was received, was an incomplete story. I had written half the story, but the other half, and to me, arguably the more important half, is what's going on now that they've come home, and what I call the afterwar.
That book is called Thank You for Your Service, which is just out now. You're just doing the book tour on it. And it is a wrenchingly powerful book. I didn't think that you could do better than The Good Soldiers, but you have. And what folks who are lucky enough to read these books will see is just the extraordinary intimacy that you have with your subjects, where you are giving play-by-play accounts of their thoughts, their feelings at the most intimate moments. How do you develop that level of trust and authority with your subjects? I mean,
Well-
day one, you're the reporter from the Washington Post who's going to be embedded with the unit. What do you do next?
Yeah, well, you go and you realize that even though the battalion commander said, come on over, that's one of 800, and 799 other people are looking at you like, who the hell are you and what are you doing here? And which, you know, it makes sense to me. They didn't invite me over. They don't know what a reporter is. They don't know what a journalist is. They have their ideas. But there were some pretty rough rumors about me at first. Number one, that I had an agenda, that I was out to show that every soldier is a war criminal or a baby killer. And that's not the case unless they had turned out to be war criminals and baby killers. But there was no agenda. There were rumors that I had been hired by the battalion commander to write his biography. Not true. There were rumors that anytime a soldier talked to me, I would go rat them out to the battalion commander. Not true. So it took a while to get some credibility. And I think the way I got it, not across the board, but the way it developed was this technique of mine, and you understand this technique as well as anyone in journalism, where you don't visit a story and you don't think you know something. You stay with the story until you're fairly confident you do know something. And so that's why I stayed with these guys for 8 months, because that's how long it took me to feel confident that I'd be telling their story rather than a version of my story. So the fact that I stayed helped. And the fact that when bad things happened, and I was present that day, and the smoke cleared, and the soldiers had a second to look around and see what was going on, they would see me at the edge. You know, I was the guy taking notes or out with the tape recorder or whatever was going on, that I didn't become a problem for them. And so they began to understand what a reporter does. Finally, I think the thing that helped is by the end, these guys had a lot to talk about, and it was either me or the chaplain. And some of them chose the chaplain and some of them didn't. And so the book came out, and I think I had some credibility, and that made this second book, which is, you know, to me, more painful in many ways, because it's describing people who have been mentally wounded by these wars, trying to fight their way back to some normal surface. I didn't have to introduce myself to them. They knew me from the first book, and when I told them what I was interested in doing, they said, "Come, you know, okay, let's see how it goes." So I think it's that. The first book allowed the second book.
Did you go into combat with the unit in Iraq? Were you?
Well, let's just say I mean, look at me, I'm a swashbuckler. And when in doubt, they all turn to me. Well, no, I went out with them all the time, because that's what you have to do, right? So much of journalism is being present, and it's just seeing what happens. It's the serendipity of what a day might bring. So at first, yeah, I was going out all the time in convoys, out 5 or 6 days a week, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I say that with a couple of caveats. Number one, I want to be very careful not to suggest I was doing anything. I mean, the point is what the soldiers were doing. And I had the luxury, if I was getting rattled and I needed a break, I could take a break. They couldn't. I didn't have to carry a weapon. They did. They were participating in a war. I was participating in journalism. So there are huge differences. But that said, you know, by the end of it, I wasn't going out very much, because I'd become, if I'm going to be honest, pretty rattled by the whole thing.
Give us some big broad brush statistics. How many people have fought in the Iraq-Afghanistan war on terror?
So since 9/11, according to the Pentagon, about 2.5 million Americans have joined the various branches of the service. Of the 2.5 million, just about 2 million have deployed either into Iraq or Afghanistan. Of the 2 million, according to the best estimates, 1.5 million have come home okay. And as I write in the book at one point, many of them are better for the experience of having served. But that leaves 20 to 30%, about 500,000 people who have served in these places to come home with some degree of psychological wound. And that's not to me, that's a significant number. It's not everybody, it's not the majority, but it's enough of a minority to, I think, merit attention. And the second book, you know, it's not about the guys who are doing well. They can get their own book. This is a different book. This is about the significant number who aren't doing well. And it's the numbers are in the book, but those are about the only numbers in there because I didn't want to write a big number book, a policy book. I just wanted to try to give readers, whoever reads this book, something to see underneath the abstraction of all these numbers that keep coming. People to care about, and not just guys, wives, girlfriends. I mean, it's coast to coast, including where this book takes place, which is in the middle of Kansas. And I just figured if I could tell some stories about some people who did well, came home, and are trying to figure out what happened to them, and why did they act that way, and how can they get better, and wives who are trying so hard to heal a family, and at night get in bed and write things in their diary like, I feel like my heart is about to explode. That if I could make these people real, if I could give a visceral sense of them, that's not a bad thing to do. They deserve that part of the story too.
Again, on your technique, how do you make that pitch to a young woman, a young wife? Hey, let me see that diary you're keeping. Can I have your diary? Can I?
Well, you know this, David. It turns out that when you're sitting across from someone and you're paying honest attention, and you're curious about not only what they have to say, but what they don't have to say, what they're doing, how they're living, people are pretty grateful for the attention. And the only, it's not a gotcha thing. Let me see your diary, things like that. It's just, I want to understand what just happened. And a conversation may develop. Here's an example, if I can. I mean, the way this is, forgive me, but maybe this will make sense. So the way the second book begins,
right,
is there's a guy in the first book named Adam Schumann, and I met Adam Schumann. I went looking for him because I heard he was a great soldier. He was one of the very best soldiers in this battalion. And so I go looking for him one day, and I find this kind of haunted-looking, gaunt man sitting on his bunk. And I introduced myself, and he said, well, I know why you're here. And I said, well, I'm here to find out about you. And he said, okay, well, today's the day I'm leaving the war. I said, okay, what's going on? And it turns out this guy, he was on his third deployment, 1,000 days in combat. He was a good soldier. He was a terrific soldier. But he had reached the point, for a variety of reasons, where he had broken open and needed to go home. So I stayed with him, and there's a scene in the first book where he walks to the helicopter out, and my reporting method is to go along, so I go along with the guy and watch him leave. And this very good guy was just so, cloaked in the sense of shame for having to leave. So that's what we know of Adam Schumann in the first book. The second book is largely about what he and his wife are going through, and it begins 2 years later. The first line of the second book is 2 years later, Adam drops the baby. And the book begins with a scene. It's 3 a.m. in Kansas. He's been home for 2 years. His wife had a baby 4 days ago. She's exhausted. And she says to this wounded guy, "Can you hold the baby for a second so I can get some sleep?" And he says, yeah, of course, I got it. Give me the baby. So she gives him the baby. And she believes enough in this moment of healing that she falls asleep. And then he closes his eyes and he relaxes, and the baby rolls out of his arms and off of his chest and over the side of the bed and hits the floor. And at that moment, the true after-war for these very good people is underway when the baby hits the ground. So the scene goes on where as Adam realizes what's happened, the baby somehow is okay, but Adam realizes what he's done, and he's driving around Kansas in the middle of the night with a shotgun pointed at himself. And meanwhile, his wife Saskia is soothing the baby and in bed trying to figure out what made the crack, what made the thud. And so she begins finding things to drop over the edge of the bed to replicate the sound. A basketball, a jug of water, just trying to understand what the dynamic was, since this happened when they were asleep. How does a reporter get that? Well, it came slowly, and it's like, I'd been over that night. I wasn't there, of course, but I had been over that night so many times with them, and maybe on the third or fourth telling from Saskia, she mentioned how she dropped a basketball. I said, "Really, what was that about?" She said, "Well, I was trying to figure out what happened." So then it's just a matter of, when you hear that, just walking through it and finding all the things she dropped and then writing the scene. It's a very long answer to a very good question.
And it's a remarkable scene because you see into their coming apart. And he's trying to be strong.
Trying to be.
She has told herself that she's going to be the perfect wife to this wounded warrior. Infinite patience.
But what happens is she gets angrier and angrier.
It's angrier and angrier.
She resents herself for getting angry, but she can't help but get angry. And sometimes the guy is so maddening.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's not maddening, she's maddening. And it's marriage, right? It's bickering, but it's bickering caused by something that neither of them knew they were getting into. Yes, he joined the service. Yes, he went to war. Yes, he went back to war. And yes, he went back for a third time. But just because you're there the third time doesn't mean you know what you're getting into. And when he came home early, and she first saw him at the airport in Manhattan, getting off the plane and walking across the tarmac, her thought is, "Oh my God," that's when it hit her. This guy's a skeleton. This is a long haul we're in for. And meanwhile, he's walking across the tarmac, dreading the moment of seeing her, because he's thinking she's going to look at me and think nothing's wrong with me, because I'm not missing a leg, I'm not missing an arm, I'm not missing an eye. They say that I'm wrong in the head, but what is that? He didn't believe it either. He's a rough, tough guy. And again, off they went.
How much of what you've witnessed do you think could be said of soldiers coming back from the Peloponnesian Wars and the Napoleonic Wars and World War I and World War II, and how much of it is unique to this current war, and why? What are the qualities of this war that you think are affecting these young soldiers?
So I try pretty hard to keep my opinions and my judgments out of these books.
Yes.
It's
Very
their
successfully.
story. But I do have a thought about this, which I guess I'd like to offer up, and maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong. Here's my thought. After being with these folks, and then part of being with them involved being with guys from Vietnam, some World War II guys, some Korea guys, and then 30 years of reporting, what I think is there's no difference, no matter what the war is and no matter what country you're in, or whether it's because of a war or not because of a war in civilian life. When something happens to you that just shakes you down to your jellied bones, it's the same. That's the common thing here. And I think the guys I talked to would back this up. So that's the common thing, and it doesn't, you can argue the same thing happened on the Iraq side. The same thing is happening with civilians in Syria right now. It's happening in Afghanistan. Where any war, any time, any event, if it shakes you down to where the only thing you can hear in your head is your own sense of shame or guilt, then that's the big deal. That's the common thing. What's different about this war, unlike previous ones in American history, is there's some system set up now for when guys come home. I keep saying guys, well, this was an infantry battalion. When soldiers, when troopers, when warriors come home and they're not well, at least there's a system now to try to help them get better. But anybody here who has had contact with the system or works in the system knows this. It's overwhelmed, it's inconsistent, it's haphazard, it's filled with people with good intentions, but at the end of the day, it's not cutting it. There's some success stories, but there are a lot of unsuccessful stories as well. And you get that sense, rather than me opining up here about it, you follow these guys through their various efforts to get better, and you can see it for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will just say that I've often thought that you're not a perfect fit as a Washington journalist, and when you said that you might or might not be right about that, it really came home to me that it's a degree of humility and self-awareness that we try not to cultivate in the group. You use the words guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Tease those out a little bit for me, because you're not just talking about feeling guilty about killing an enemy combatant, presumably.
No, so here's Saskia, Adam's wife, who I can't imagine someone trying harder. She's a strong person, but on the days when she didn't come through, of course, she felt guilty about her anger. Let me give you a better example. About one of the guys in the book. God, my answers are going on for a while.
You're doing great.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a guy in the book named Tesolo Ayeti. Great soldier. And he doesn't show up in the first book by name, but he does show up by incident. He's the Humvee one day, 5 guys in this Humvee, and it drives over 3 deep buried shells, and the trigger man in the shadows hits the button at the right moment, and this Humvee is blown sky high. Comes down. Ayeti has a broken leg, but he gets out of the Humvee, and then he realizes there are still guys in the Humvee, and so despite the broken leg, he makes his way back, and he helps pull out 2 wounded guys. Pretty great. Pretty good soldier. Can't get to the driver. No one gets to the driver. The driver, a 19-year-old, burns to death. So I know about it because I was there. I know about it because in the aid station, I was with Ayeti. That's the day I met him, when he was being treated, and I was with him when he said to a soldier passing by, "What about Harrelson?" And the soldier just shook his head, and that's when Ayeti knew he had died. So that's my history with Ayeti. I caught up with him again and followed him in the second book, because here's what happened to him after that. He doesn't tell anybody this, but he starts having dreams. And the dreams show up at least once a week, and sometimes more often. And the dreams aren't about the 2 guys he saved. The dream is about the guy he didn't save. And in the dream, the guy is on fire saying, "Why didn't you save me?" So I think that's what I'm talking about when I talk about shame, which is inexplicable to anyone, but it doesn't matter. I said to Ayeti one day, "Don't you ever dream about the guys you did save?" And he said, "That's not what my dreams are about." And for whatever reason, it doesn't matter how many times along the way, including when he cracked open and had to be hospitalized, and he was in a very good PTSD program, and on his graduation day, people kept saying to him, you're a hero, you're a hero. Everybody knew it, except Ayeti, who knew better. He knew what he was, and he was a guy who didn't save the driver. It didn't matter that no one else did. This is Ayeti's conversation with himself at that point. So I think I said to somebody once, you know, at the end of the day, there's no shame like your own shame, and it drowns everything else out. It defines you no matter how illogical it is.
You have the opening character, Adam. You talk about an event where he was not even on the scene of an IED explosion, and afterwards someone says to him, well, because he was so good at spotting potential IEDs, if you'd been with us, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Because you would have seen the bomb. And
Yeah.
attempting to pay him a
Yeah,
compliment.
the quote was, none of this, pardon the word, none of this shit would have happened if you were there.
Right.
And it was meant as a soldier's compliment. He would have seen it, but the way Adam heard it was as an indictment.
It's your
You
fault.
know, it's your fault. If you had been there, this wouldn't have happened. It's on you. And you know, that's just a quote that's haunted the guy throughout the book until, you know, it's fascinating. Just there's some point in the book when he and that soldier meet up years later, and what happens between them is so tender. And you know, there are a couple things in this book. It's just that show, you know, there's this maxim about war that by the end of war, what you've learned is you're only in it for the guy next to you. That's the truth of war, and then what the book shows, I think, is the truth of the after war is you're just in it on your own. That if you're a rough and tough soldier, it's hard to say anything. You don't talk to your wife, you don't talk to your family, you don't talk to anybody, you don't even talk to the guys anymore. It's just this very lonesome existence. And a couple times in the book, Adam Schumann would meet up with guys he had served with. And what happened between them was just so heartbreaking and gorgeous and tender and lovely. It was astonishing.
Junction City, tell us a little bit about that. It's such an interesting place because it's kind of a company town, and yet
Right.
it's full of these folks who are no longer working for the company, but they're dealing with is there, you talk about each man, each family in it by themselves. Why isn't there more of a community there?
Well, one of the things anybody here from Junction City?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know. Okay. One of the great things about Junction City is they had a Value Place hotel where I could stay for $125 a week. With kitchen, so go Junction City. And in Manhattan, I wasn't getting that deal. Junction City also had a very good Taco Bell that would give me free sauce that I could put on my leftover rice from the Chinese takeout place from the previous night. It's a glamorous life.
It is a glamorous life.
I think even the soldiers were ashamed to know me at some point. But Junction City, Wamego, Clay Center, there's this area where all of the people, except for some guy at the Pentagon, all of the people in the book live, because what I decided to do was, I mean, it's such a vast universe. How do you write about the afterwar if there's so many people populating this universe? So I decided there was, you know, Adam was my guy. Saskia was great to know and write about. And then I just figured, so what I'm going to do is just write about one cluster of the many, many clusters across the country that are the results of these wars. And so everybody in the book knows each other, or their lives and deaths have somehow affected each other. And that's Junction City. To me, it's a place where I got to spend time with Adam and Saskia and a great caseworker named Patty Walker, who I think helped save Adam's life by getting him in a very good treatment program. He would say that his life was saved as well. It's where Tisolo Ayeti lived in an apartment complex that was filled with nothing but soldiers living off post, and And there were suicides at that apartment complex to the point where the poor apartment manager had to be the one to go in and scrub the apartments down, and called one particular month, I think, Bloody November, if I have it right.
Gosh.
It's, they're all there. They're all there living in, you know, there's no romanticism in these books, but I think of Junction City probably in a bit of a romantic way, because these very good, amazing, wounded, pissed off, angered, funny people all lived there and were trying to climb their way forward. So that's, you know, Junction City has a long, weird history, but to me, it's just the place where all these people came home to and lived and tried to get better.
So you embed yourself in the lives of these, they're characters in the book, but they're real people, and everything that you show and say really happened, and it's firsthand. That's a process that presumably could go on forever.
Right.
At some point, you stop and you write the book, or do you write it as it's going? You can't write it as it's going along. You have to find, I guess, the arc of the story. In my case, I know I'm done reporting a book because I've run out of money. But how do you know when you have enough?
So the first book was easy because it was about guys going to war. So they went to war, they were at war, they came home from the war. Sort of the Army dictated the reporting end of that book. Okay, so here's, honest to God, here's when I thought, I am done reporting this new book.
Yes.
And if you've heard this story, just bear with me. So Adam goes to this treatment program in California, in Northern California. The one in Topeka is full. There's another one in Colorado somebody else goes to in the book, that's full. The waiting lists are long. This guy needs some help. His caseworker finds a program in Northern California where he spends 5 months. Great program, just tears him apart, saves his life. And he graduates, and then it's time to come back to Kansas. So I figure, all right, you know, I'm gonna go see the graduation. Good reporting, I'll get in the back seat and drive back to Kansas with Adam and Saskia. And their plan is to leave at sundown and keep driving straight through. Okay, well, I'm a little old for this game, but there I am in the back seat, and you know, they're good to their word. They drive, they stop for gasoline, they stop for some bottles of water. That's it, they keep going. And as a reporter, you're not supposed to ever fall asleep. But I gotta tell you, somewhere around 2 in the morning, somewhere, I guess it was Utah, I'm in the back seat, I fell asleep. And to show you what a nice guy Adam Schumann is, he has to go to the bathroom. But he's afraid that if he pulls over, I'm gonna wake up. So he does the older rock trick. As he's driving, he just pees into a water bottle and keeps going. Now the reason I know this, unfortunately, is about an hour later, I wake up, I'm a little thirsty. So I'm in the back seat and I'm reaching around and I grab my water bottle and I unscrew the lid and I take a big swig. And then I think, I am just so done reporting this book. Isn't that terrible? So it gets worse, because I don't want them to know what I've done. But I've got to figure out if I'm about to die or something. So it's what? It's 2 or 3 hours later on the East Coast where my wife lives, so I send her a text. I'd say, I'll explain later, but how bad is it to drink human urine? And I get a text back, I've checked it out, you can drink your own urine once and you'll be okay. So I send another text, I'll explain later. Oh my God. Anyway, so look, if you read my book, if you read David's book, if you read any journalist, cut them some slack, man. There's a lot of work that goes into those sentences. That's not in the book. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
What, the title of your book is Thank You for Your Service, is so obviously, I mean, powerfully, I would say, an indictment of the ease with which American society has not outsourced, but sourced our warfighting to a professional military. And we give them a little gratuitous wave at best. Thank you for your service, without really having, until we read your books, much understanding of what that service amounts to. Do you have a sense of what more we as a country could be doing for these families than we are doing now?
Well, yeah, that's a pretty good question for this particular place. The title is, I mean, we all know the phrase, and maybe we've said the phrase. It's ubiquitous. I didn't mean this title as an indictment or in any kind of judgmental way, because I think if it, not to worry, because if it comes across that way, then it seems like, I'm the one trying to, it's a little sanctimonious of me. So I was worried about that title, but I finally came around to it when I gave it a simple explanation in my own head, which is, you read this book, and in between the covers, you get to know these people. It's as simple as, so when you say that, these are some of the people you're thanking, and this is some of what you're thanking them for, to deepen understanding. Maybe that sounds simplistic to you, but that's really just the intent of the title. So it gets to what your question is, what do people do? I don't know what people do. I wrote some books about this. People have read the first book, and in response to it, some people have volunteered at Walter Reed. They've started volunteering to help wounded soldiers, or they've donated certain places. But there's no requirement to do anything. This is a professional military. People are volunteering to go. They're used to people not really paying attention to them. And maybe the way to frame the question is what would they like?
Right.
Is that okay to frame it that way?
Absolutely.
And if I can speak for them, from having spent 7 years with them now, I think what they'd like is for people to pay honest attention, and that's about it. Then you can take it from there individually, but at least, pay some honest attention to who they are and what they're going through. It's the stories, the stories in the second book. These people, I didn't pick the ones in the worst shape. I didn't pick the extremes, because while the extreme often makes an entertaining story, most people, we don't live at the extremes. We live in the middle. And if you're going to relate to a character in the book, that character ought to be from the representative middle. And that's who these folks are. They are not the worst off, they're not the best off, but I think they represent much of what's going on in the country. And I think it's pretty damn brave of them that they said to a guy, without knowing what the book was going to read like until it was published. That's the deal. They couldn't see the book until it came out. As journalists, and you know this, we can't allow the people we're writing about to be the editors of their own story, or in some ways the censors of their own story. So part of the thing they had to agree to was, I'm going to be around for whatever happens to you until I feel like I have a story to write, and you'll get to see it when everybody else gets to see it. I think it was incredibly brave of every one of them to open themselves up and take a chance. And I think it gets to how deep the need is, or deep the hope is, that people will pay honest attention to what they've been through, and more importantly, what they're going through now.
Well, you've certainly paid attention, and 7 years of dedication to the story is a testament to that. And I thank you for your service in providing this look to me, and I hope to the rest of you. I'm going to open it up for questions after just a couple of others. You are rare among journalists in many ways, but you are a certified genius by the MacArthur Foundation.
Yeah, yeah, this is what it takes, folks. Line forms here, right? Yeah.
What is that? How does that work?
I have no idea.
Do you have any idea how you
No,
got
no, I
that?
was sitting at home writing this book, and it's 7 in the morning, and my cell phone rings, and 7 in the morning, okay, I'm busy writing, what's the deal here? It's a number I don't recognize, it's a woman on the other end, she introduces herself, it's a name I recognize, and I think, what has one of my reporters done now? And she says, are you alone? And I said, yeah, I'm alone. She said, no, I'm serious. Are you alone? And I said, it's me and a cat. She goes, well, okay, that'll do. She said, have you heard of the MacArthur Fellows? And I said, yes. She goes, well, you're one of them now. I said, okay, great. And so we stay on the phone for a few minutes, and she's telling me about this, and I'm thinking, yeah, right. And knew, of course, it was a setup. And at the end, she said, so here's a number, call this number, and they'll fill you in. So I wrote the number down, and I hung up. And of course I didn't call the number, because the number, I'm sure, is going, even though it's 312 area code, is somehow going to connect to the Washington Post newsroom, where the entire staff was going to laugh and say, you bought it! So maybe to that afternoon, the phone rings again, and it's the folks in Chicago saying, we're waiting for you to call. So I started taking it a little seriously at that point, and yeah, what a weird thing. I mean, you don't know about it. You don't apply for it. You just get this call out of the blue saying, you got this thing. And then when you realize who else has got this, you just think, well, they've made a terrible mistake. They meant the other David Finkel, the photographer or something.
I got friended by David Finkel on Facebook, and only after sending him a very personal, self-revealing, angst-ridden message did I find out he was an accountant in Atlanta.
Yeah, I've heard. Listen, I've heard about this guy because what would happen is so I work at the Washington Post, and people would come up to me. They'd written a story, and they start saying, "Why are we so mean about my story?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, well, you just insulted the hell out of it on Facebook. And I look, and there's a comment from some guy named David Finkel ripping this story apart. And it's not me, so I'd say, no, it's some other guy. And it finally got to the point where the editor came over and said, you got to cut this out. Not me. No, I'm the kind David Finkel.
The beloved David Finkel, I think,
David Finkel.
is the phrase that we use
Yeah.
around the office. Do we have any questions for David?
I hope so.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your books.
Okay.
I think they're really important.
Okay, thank you.
On the subject of what the soldiers might want, it seems to me in some way that your honest attention to them was something that many love them to tell their stories. Is that something that maybe should be more widely practiced by people for those soldiers who do wish to share their stories, to afford them opportunities just to talk about it?
Well, whether in published form or not, I think one of the things that was helpful to me after I came home so frightened after my time in Baghdad was that I came home with this big pile of notes, and I got to spend almost a year confronting those notes every day, confronting the events that happened, and making narrative sense of them. And so just the engagement every day, I guess it's a form of therapy, right? Cognitive processing therapy or whatever, where you're kind of brought to the event again and again until you get some control over it. In my sense, getting control over it meant I found an honest way to write about it. Yeah, there's no shortage of soldiers and ex-soldiers who are writing their stories, either for themselves or in diaries, or for group therapy sessions, or for blog posts or whatever. I mean, there are places, but it doesn't have to be writing. I'm not trying to be too touchy-feely here, but I think just moving on from the thing, I mean, this was significant what they went through. And they came home and moved on to the next thing. And at some point in your life, whether it's right away or 10 years or 20 or 50 years from now, I mean, every World War II guy I've talked to is still, making sense. What was that? And same questions. What did I become? Whether you write it or think about it or talk about it, there's nothing but healthy benefits as far as from what I've seen.
Sure.
I have a question. How many, what percentage perhaps of the soldiers you talked to in the second book remained on active duty and were still on active duty when you talked?
So I didn't talk to everybody in the battalion, 800 guys, and I can't tell you a specific answer. I mean, some guys got out and some guys stayed in.
I mean, of the people you talked to, what I meant, at the second book.
Well, by the time I got them in the second book, they were either out or they were transitioning out because they were in units called a Warrior Transition Battalion, which is, maybe everybody here knows what a WTB is, but if you don't, it was these, as it became clear that more and more soldiers were coming back and they needed some special attention to get back on their feet. These units, these WTBs or WTUs were started, and pretty good intention, I think. Pretty good thing, where you have dedicated caseworkers, a pharmacist, a psychologist, a chaplain, that kind of thing. Just dedicated attention. Nice idea, except, you go, one WTB is better than another, which is to say some are pretty great and some are pretty awful. And the one at Riley, from what I saw, was pretty good. At the same time, they had their procedures. So that soldier I was describing earlier who got blown up in the Humvee and rescued the two guys and had the bad dream, he got pretty rattled that day, and he has memory problems. And some days he's pretty good, but some days, it's hard to remember where he parked the car. And he interviews for and earns a spot in the WTB. And his sergeant's saying, "This is it, buddy, this is it. This is it, you're gonna get better." Good thing to get in there. Except he shows up, and right away he's handed a list with, I think, 39 names on it, and said, your task over the next few days is you gotta go around and introduce yourself to these people and get their signatures so we know that you met them. The guy can't even find his car some days. And so he was let loose on Fort Riley, and he'd go to an office and he'd ask for the person, and the person was out to lunch, or, that person transferred out a week ago. That's the way it goes with cadre. We have somebody else now. And it was, some days it was absurd watching this guy go through it, and sometimes it was hysterical, and some days it just broke my heart. Good intentions, again, good intentions, but the reality of good intentions sometimes is absurdity and heartbreak. And what I saw with that guy on those days was exactly that.
Any soldiers being medicated? I saw a segment on TV.
Yeah, there's one guy. Oh, sure. They were all on meds, and one guy, the extreme example. He wasn't the extreme example of all time. He was the extreme example in this book. He'd start his morning by taking 43 different medications. Get that. And of the 43, it's not like they were 43 different types. Several were different versions of an antidepressant. Several were different versions of anti-anxiety. He would take a sleeping pill to get to sleep. This is IETI now. He wasn't on 43, I think he was on 20-some. But that included one particular pill to get to sleep, and then he'd have the dream, and he'd wake up, and then he had another prescription of a different type of sleeping pill to calm him down enough to get back to sleep for the rest of the night.
I have another question about multiple tours.
Yeah.
I'm a Vietnam veteran, but just one tour. I knew guys that re-upped and for various reasons that were soldiers. I mean, I was in the Kansas National Guard, got activated, and ended up in the first air cabin in Vietnam. But my question about these guys on multiple tours, I don't think we have enough. You mentioned Adam had to go to California
Yeah.
to help. What's going to happen to all these guys, those 500,000 that, you know, and that are still on tour in Afghanistan, and some of these guys are pulling back out of the
Yeah, so there have been enough studies now that show that multiple deployments, especially into these kinds of conflicts, there's a cumulative effect. At the same time, look, you have guys who have had 3-4 tours and they're doing all right. So when you're trying to come up with the specific thing that what might be causing some of these reactions, it gets so murky because when you get right down to it, you can have 2 guys standing side by side. The same thing happens at the same moment to both of them. And one absorbs it and eventually moves on, and the other is kind of hobbled by it forever. So why? Same event, 2 different people. And if you could solve that, you're on your way, man.
Do you hear any criticism from the guys that are back, fine, thriving, that I recall speaking over the years with various Vietnam veterans who felt like, oh, everybody expects us to go crazy and shoot up a McDonald's. Is there any concern that you hear about the whole 2 million soldiers being, pathologized because there is this genuine mental health crisis?
Well, more specific to the book, it's been out a couple weeks now, and among my emails, there's some from people, you're just perpetuating the stereotype of the broken soldier. And the first time I heard it, I wrote back, I felt badly, am I doing that? But then I thought about it, and I started getting a little ticked off at the question, actually, because the fact is there are some broken soldiers, and to write about them, to explain their lives, to explain their broken lives as they attempt to heal, that's not perpetuating a stereotype. They exist. They're going through it, and to ignore that because I'm concerned about perpetuating a stereotype, it seems disrespectful of what they're going through. So, maybe I'm being overly defensive about it, but I've been content with that answer for several days now. And I'm sticking with it.
First, you, and then you, sir. And then just over. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and the finish there. Yes, you.
So I was curious, with daily news reporting, people have a colleague who's file these reports, you would find that people would turn up within the embedded with. So that it was hard to be honest as a daily news reporter to talk about what he saw.
You mean if he wrote honestly about what was going on and it was published?
People would be told not to talk to him.
I see, right.
So I'm wondering how you deal as a daily reporter, how you deal with the conflicts. I mean, it's much easier if you're writing a book.
Right.
And it's not going to appear for 8 months.
Right. I think.
The question is, for journalists who are embedded in units and filing their reports daily, as opposed to writing a book that will come out later, so that the people you're alongside will have an opportunity to read tomorrow what you wrote about them today and how that affects the dynamic.
Yeah, I can see how it would affect the dynamic. I don't know. I mean, while I was reporting the book over there, I did write some daily stories for the Washington Post, including, and I didn't hold back. Look, one of the things that happened, and it's not the main story of The Good Soldiers, but it's become a big story in a lot of people's minds, was, I don't know, oh God, am I going to get into this? So Okay, so the organization WikiLeaks, at one point in, I guess it was April 2010, released a video of some helicopter gunships firing on a group of people.
Right.
Okay, that was these guys. That's in my book. I was there that day, and I wrote about it extensively. And it was part of a battalion-wide mission to try to calm down a restive area where there were a lot of bombs going off and a lot of soldiers had been injured. So they did this battalion-wide operation, and one company was to the, everything's separated by what, maybe 2 kilometers, and one company's to the west and it's pretty calm. One company's in the middle where it's a little dicier and they're going through mosques and finding some weapons and things like that. And then there's the company over to the east where they were running gun battles all morning long, and gunships were attached to the battalion that day and circling overhead, and then they opened fire. And at the end of the day, when we were all back and I went to the operations center and I saw these 2 cameras laying there, I thought, oh no, what's the deal? Because I know those cameras. These are journalists. These are photographers' cameras. And that's the first I heard, because I was in the middle. I mean, I heard the gun bursts, and I knew a bunch of people had been killed, but I didn't know it included these 2 guys from Reuters until late in the day. So very quickly, did some interviews and co-wrote a story about this that was in the next day's Washington Post. It wasn't a critical story. It wasn't a compliment. It was a story. And the next day, some guys were upset that I had written about this, but tough beans is the way it goes. It was the story of the day. It was important, so I wrote it. And if they froze me out, so it goes. There were plenty of other people to approach and talk to and get to know. I don't mean that to sound like a callous answer. Any daily reporter worth his salt will find a way forward. I sympathize with what you're describing. I think the only answer is you're there as a reporter, something happens, you got to write the truth of the story, and then if it comes back to haunt you, then you got to get out because you're not doing your job well, and somebody else can come in. But you write the thing in front of you and deal with the consequences later. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such a temptation, especially when you're deeply in a story, to be liked by the people you're spending all this time with. You come to like them, you'd like them to like you, but it's not the job to be liked.
Well, let me put it another way. So let's say one of those soldiers one day did save my life. And then a few months later, I found out that soldier was being brought up on charges of abusing Iraqis. So, this is conjecture, but let's say that happened.
Right.
Would I write about that soldier after he saved my life? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm pretty absolute on this. You just write the thing in front of you, and your obligation is not to the people you're writing about. Oh, this sounds so corny. But your obligation is to tell as true a story as you can about those people. You're writing about those people, not to those people. And then whatever the consequences are, you deal with them the next day. I guess.
Sure.
You ever injured physically or mentally, or what kind of protection did you?
Physically, no. I was in the middle of some things, but I'm happy to say that I was not injured. Mentally, I don't think so. I was doing some Q&A with the New York Times the other day, and that question came up. And I'm pretty good at deflecting that question and saying, this is the proper deflection, which is, I'm fine, let's pay attention to the real thing, which is the soldiers, the ones who are fine, and the ones who aren't fine, it's their story. But I decided, to take a swing at it. And I guess my answer is that I don't know. I know I'm, as I described in that answer, I'm sadder than I used to be. I'm more grateful than I used to be. I like being on my own more than I used to be. I dream of war, but I don't dream of it as often as I did a couple of years ago. And finally, I said that I'm grateful to have friends now, not then, but friends now who are soldiers. And I'm glad that those soldiers are friends with someone like me. And I think that's my answer.
Was that free? Okay. In your opinion, has our government and the VA have they given enough services to these men to help them recover?
Yeah, I'll disappoint you with my answer. I want to couch whatever I say in what I observed. And what I observed is an overwhelmed system populated with some bad people, but populated with a lot of great people trying hard. But at the end of the day, in the cases of these soldiers, they were doing okay, and maybe more of them could have been doing better. And so you go back to the answer I gave about the guy who got 39 signatures. But at the same time, in that same system is a caseworker who, when Adam Schumann needed help, and one place was full, another place was full, she kept looking until she found another place for him. So, you know, like everything, it's a mixed answer. There's no clean answer to a very good question.
It is complicated, I know.
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, I could listen all night, but
Can I just say, this is so, what a downer. This is such a, I promise you, if this is a true reflection of these people, there are some very sad moments in this book, but there are some moments that aren't so sad either.
there are some powerful, heartening moments, there are funny moments. The book is on sale out here. David will sign them, I bet, if you buy them. I cannot recommend these books more highly. And they not only is the reporting brilliant, but they are exquisitely well written. And they are the whole roller coaster of human emotion under these most dramatic of circumstances. And it's an incredible achievement. We're so glad that you came out. Next month's guest is Justin Gillis of the New York Times. He covers climate change for them, and will talk to us about that very powerful issue and what it's like to cover such a controversial subject. Again, thanks to the Kauffman Foundation, the Truman Library Institute, Crosby, and the Kansas City Public Library for hosting, and especially David Finkel. Thank you very much.